I'm going to give a brief introduction to Dean Guzman. She's our next speaker. Let me just state that there are full bios in the materials for this conference. We are giving very brief intros this morning, but the people, each of the people that are speaking deserve a full page of discussion about their background. So Dean Guzman is Dean of the University of Oklahoma Law School. She is the first full-time, longest-serving female dean of the University of Oklahoma Law School. When I was in law school at OU, there were very few female on any faculty. She is a very accomplished teacher. The students love her. They talk about how great she is. She teaches wills, estates, real property is her passion. She has served on the faculty at OU Law since 1993. She's been recognized many times for all of her excellence in teaching. She's won several awards, and she is a co-reporter for Uniform Law Commission Model Tribal Probate Code. She works, has some published articles on that. She is from Pennsylvania, I believe, originally, but she got her education, some of it in Arkansas, and also at Yale. And we are just very fortunate to have her at the University of Oklahoma.
Well, Justice Gurich, thank you very much. Where's Justice Gurich? Oh, there you are. Someone had spoke, I think it was Dr. Sandbar, had commented earlier, or the comment from Dr. Sandbar was shared about how Justice Gurich just keeps walking through doors. And I think that is so true. I have learned so much from her. I continue to learn from Justice Gurich, and I feel really, really honored to have been invited to talk about some of the things that I feel so passionately about today at the intersection between mental health and law. Now, Justice Gurich had also noted, or someone had noted, that some of us come by our experience or come by some knowledge about what we're talking about today by training, and others by experience. I am one who has come to this by experience, and I've come to it by my own experience. And so I take maybe a little bit of a unique approach. I feel a little bit anxious and a little bit nervous about sharing some of what I'm about to share with you all. But I do believe so firmly in the notion that part of what we need to do is remove stigma around some of these issues. And so that's why I am just feeling like a vulnerable, sweaty cat up here right now, but I'm going to keep going. All right, you see this picture. This is a picture of me at age 5. And I look really happy, don't I? I'm the one with the, little yellow circle around myself. I'm happy, I'm smiling. It seems as though maybe nothing is really going on bad in my life there. I'm with my older sister, and we are collecting candy, as you might be able to tell. But you can also see that I have a little purse on my shoulder. And, I don't know what 5-year-olds really normally carry in their purses, but I know why I carried that purse. And I carried that purse for quite some time. It was because of early and somewhat undiagnosed stress at that point. I don't know if anyone remembers this commercial, but aside from some of the concerns that we now have with this commercial, was back in the late 60s, early 1970s, but it was about pollution. And it was effectively how, we were harming our environment in so many appreciable ways by what we were doing. And I became obsessed with pollution, and I became obsessed with trash, and I became obsessed with trying to pick it up wherever I could. And so literally we would be driving down the road, and we would have to pull over sometimes 10 times on the way to school because I would see trash floating around. And I had seen that commercial, and I had thought about the ways that it could damage the environment, and I would pick it up. And I'd pick it up and I'd pick it up. And I had this horrible fear around that trash floating forever, both in terms of time and space. And I just couldn't get it out of my mind. worried about infinity, although I didn't have that term for it, worried about eternity, although I didn't have that term for it either. What I did was simply picture the trash, as noted, floating forever, never really disintegrating, never dissipating, just on and on and on until we were buried underneath a complete mound. Now, I finally at some point started trying to picture it in a circle, infinity in a circle, and that helped a little bit. But it was such a long road when I was a child with regard to trying to figure out ways that might be able to that might be able to help me in discerning what was going on, that might be able to help my parents in discerning what might be going on with me. So many trips to the doctor, so many trips, so many tests for strep, tests for mono, tests for this, tests for that. What helped when I was growing up was, first off, just trying to reframe, think about things in a circle, so I didn't think about things going on forever and into the ether forever. A lot of exercise. High school, and junior high, I played field hockey, I played lacrosse, I did gymnastics, I did swimming. I didn't realize that that was having a positive effect on my mental health, on my stresses, on my anxieties, on my worries, on my inabilities to concentrate when I was in school, all of those things. And I watched a lot of television. And those of you who are familiar at all with Nick at Night, you might recognize some of these. Dobie Gillis. It was like a sleeping pill on the television. One of the most boring shows I think I've ever watched. I watched Dobie Gillis with Maynard Krebs, otherwise known as Gilligan from Gilligan's Island up there. I watched Father Knows Best, and that had its own form of effect on my mental health sometimes. Watched a lot of Bewitched. So these were the types of things that we did, that my mother and I did, because I was not diagnosed with any kind of anxiety issue. I was not diagnosed with any type of compulsivity at that point in time. It was simply just this ineffable kind of sense that I always felt that something was wrong, something's wrong. And it affected so much of my youth in ways that I really think negatively impacted my ability to accomplish some of the things even in junior high and high school and college that we think about. So it didn't really change much thereafter. I get to Yale. I earned a Master of Laws at Yale. And this is the library at Yale. And this is, I put this picture up because this is kind of how it eventually started to get for me when I was pursuing my Juris Doctor and my Master of Laws. It felt dark. It felt as though literally, and it seems so peculiar to talk about it now. I'm almost embarrassed to suggest that this was the case, but it felt literally as though my vision were becoming impaired. It felt like things were getting darker around the edges of my vision and a little bit fuzzy. Things looked torqued somewhat. Things looked as though there was an unusual cast or slant or perspective to that which I was viewing, and my hair started to fall out. I don't know why I laugh at that. I've got a lot of it, and it certainly is a different color than when I started being dean about soon to be 5 years ago. But I started having terrible insomnia. Everything became worse. I have to think part of it was because I had stopped exercising as much. I did not have time to watch Bewitched in the evening. I don't even know that I had that capacity at New Haven because I didn't want to, I was on such a budget. I really didn't want to purchase all of those options for what I was watching on television. So I became scared. I really started to become scared because I wasn't, as I said, exactly sure what was happening. And I went back to the doctor, and I went back to a number of doctors. And finally, my mother said, you need to go see a professional. You need to see a mental health counselor. And I did. I went to see someone who was both a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And I started to talk, and I'll never forget the feeling of relief. And at this point, I'm in my mid-20s, I'd say, but I will never forget the feeling of relief when he started to ask me questions. Have you experienced this? Have you experienced this? Do you feel sometimes as though you're at the optometrists and they've switched that little lens and your vision and I yes, yes, such a relief. And he said, I think what we're dealing with here is anxiety with some panic attacks thrown in. I think that's what you're confronting. And sometimes I don't remember the principle. I don't remember if it's the Heisenberg principle or Schrodinger's cat or someone, I don't remember, and I probably shouldn't pretend to know, but it's something about sometimes how the nature of the thing observed can change even just by the fact of its observation, something along those lines. And that palpable relief that I experienced in thinking there's a name for this. Maybe it's just garden variety, fill in the blank, garden variety anxiety, garden variety panic. I started vomiting, numbness in my extremities. I thought I had a brain tumor. Garden variety, neuroticism, possibly. I'm not sure. But things started to change for the better, even just having that sense of relief. One other thing that changed for the better is eventually I was working at a law firm in downtown Philadelphia, and this was the building we were in. And I can remember the day that I was up in one of the top floors, and I had always been a little bit anxious about going up there because I had to go up there and give a presentation once. And when I looked out the window, all I saw were clouds and air, and I felt very, very disoriented, very disoriented. But the doctor that I saw at the time said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try something called, and I'll share the name of it with you. I still find it a little bit concerning, but if I don't want other people to feel stigmatized, I don't need to feel stigmatized myself either. But it was Xanax. He said, we're going to try some Xanax here. And the way that he framed it back in at this point, it's early to mid 90s, as he said, early 90s at that point, he said, let's treat this like training wheels, and we can do cognitive behavioral therapy. You can get back into much more exercise. Endorphins are good for the blood and the soul and the heart and the mind and all of those things. But let's take this medication at the same time, and let's see how that works. And I will, a lot of things happened in rapid succession. I got married on a Sunday. I moved across the country from Philly to Norman, Oklahoma, arrived on Thursday, started teaching the following Monday. So there got a lot of stresses in my life there, leaving private practice, moving into teaching, getting married, had never really been in Oklahoma before in my life, aside from flying into Tulsa sometimes because my father was living in Fayetteville, Arkansas. But I remember when I started taking that medication, and I had to go back. I got to go back to Yale for a conference and a presentation, and I was presenting on something, and walking into that library and seeing things in a completely different way. All of a sudden, it didn't seem dark and it didn't seem torqued. All of a sudden, I could see some of those little, what those little images were on the stained glass. And I thought, never again, never again. This is something that I am going to, maybe it sounds hyperbolic, and perhaps in slight ways it is, but I don't ever want anyone to experience this unnecessarily as I had at law school. And so when I got to Norman and when I started teaching from the very beginning, this was something about which I was passionate. And I would try to talk with my students all the time in safe ways and in safe spaces and possibilities. Hopefully I accomplished that. I don't think I ever tried to bring it up very publicly with students, but in ways that would help them be able to focus in law school with everything that law school was demanding of our students and continues to demand of our students with respect to stress and anxiety and the depression that can sometimes accompany it, and the inhibition. I think the inhibitions that are generated to learning and to integration of information in new ways and to building on information under relatively stressful arenas. I still avoided. I still limited my professional opportunities because I still avoided public speaking whenever and wherever I could. And I still do to this day. This was something I was felt privileged to be invited. I wanted to participate, but truth be told, I was up pretty late last night, couldn't fall asleep, just thinking about, oh my goodness, what if I say something stupid, or what if I overshare, and then people think, well, that made no sense. But again, I think that if we're going to confront these issues honestly, then we have to be honest about our experiences, as well as the experiences that might confront our students, whether they're medical students, whether they're nursing students, whether they're law students, whether they're college, they're undergraduates, whether they're in the K through 12. Because all of these students are coming through the same system, and there are things that we can do at every single intersection point to help our students and to help the professions that they engage and enter, and help the communities that they will thereafter serve. So a lot of avoidance, but it's really tough to avoid. I'm kind of focusing here on law. For example, it's really tough to avoid stressful situations when you're in law school. We'll focus on that just here for a minute, or whether you're in practice, because there is so much, for example, that is going to require or demand public speaking, whether it's negotiating or appearing in court, or arguing motions, or negotiating treaties, or discussing things with clients, moderating panel discussions, serving on panels. It's really difficult to avoid. And so again, my goal from the get-go has been to understand, to research, to know, and to find intersection points that can possibly help with respect to how we engage with our students in the educational enterprise, whether, irrespective of what level of education we are undertaking. Here are just some law student statistics, and I apologize for this. I have a stack about this tall of articles well, if I added the books, it would obviously go much higher, but of articles and data and reports and so on. For law school, I have much less. For medical school, for college in general, I added that because I didn't want this to be law centric or law specific, even though we can see statistics like this, and there's no contest. I don't want to make it like, oh, well, law school is the most challenging. By no means do I mean to suggest that whatsoever. But some of the data do reflect this. You can see that first one, stress on law students, is different. 96% of law students experience significant stress, compared with about 70% of medical students and about 43% of grad students. And there was this huge publication that came out in 2021. And it was so interesting. And you can see some of the data here at the bottom, because it was doing a 7-year assessment. It was looking at how law students were responding to some of these issues back in 2014, and then their response in 2021. And I was not flummoxed. Maybe there was some flummoxing. Maybe there was more. I was more startled. I was more startled by the fact that it looked like these numbers were just effectively doubling across the board. 2014, need help for emotional mental problems, 42%, went to close to 70%, so not quite a double. Depression, 18 to 33. Positive depression screens, 17% to 34%. Anxiety, 21% to 40%. Suicidal thoughts over the prior year, 6 to 11. So roughly doubling in that 7-year period. I am not a public health specialist. I am one of those people who simply comes at this and comes at my concern and my desire to help however I can, honestly, organically, because of some of the issues with which I have struggled, and that I think still affect me, notwithstanding my knowledge about it. I did, oh, by the way, a little bit of research on that Xanax. Again, I'm not a medical professional. I don't purport to be. But when I started to do research after it was initially prescribed, I became a bit concerned about how that was going to play out long term. And so I titrated myself off of it in the first year that I came to OU and started to teach. And so I just decided I need to ramp back up on some of the healthy behaviors that at the time I hadn't realized were affecting my anxiety and my mental well-being. I think that's important to point out as well, because I do think that there are many interprofessional and cross-cutting approaches and attempts that we can take to assist our students who are dealing with these types of issues. Here's some lawyer stats. This is a pretty significant study that was completed just last year. Mental health problems and substance abuse at crisis level, 44% within the legal profession. Above is according to the statistics, worse in the legal industry than in other industries, or at least the perception, back to the point that Commissioner Slatton-Hodges had noted with regard to perception affecting reality. Perceived as worse, sometimes the rhetoric does become the reality. The respondent feels depressed, 35%, feels anxious, 66%, two-thirds of lawyers report feeling anxious. Now, one can feel anxious and not, quote, have an anxiety disorder or be in full-blown panic attack mode. Nevertheless, we know that these types of feelings can lead to the type of self-medication that has its own externalities, negative as they often are. Legal profession negatively affects mental health over time. 75% of the respondents said, yeah, over time it just gets worse. Negatively affects personal relationships. So back to kind of prosociality, if I understood some of those terms right. 64% suicidal ideation, contemplation, almost 20%. I don't have, and I'm embarrassed by this screen because I do not have the sources cited, but if anyone's interested, I can go back and pull from my stack and share some of them. But students in the medical field, it looks like there are some similar concerns, 3 times more likely to contemplate or attempt suicide than across the general population. About a third experience in anxiety, 28% or so depression, and over time, this has increased 3 to 4 times over the past decade. These statistics, these numbers, there is an increase across the board. It's not just law school. It's not just those in the medical field. It continues. Here's some specifics with regard to professionals within the medical field. There's a lot of detail on that. Again, I won't read it. I will simply share with you that the numbers alarm me. Again, flummox, I'm confused by, yeah, maybe a little bit, but really just more alarming, and perhaps not as alarming for me, simply because this has been something that for the past 30 years at the University of Oklahoma College of Law, I've thought about, I have worked on, I have tried to discern potential intervention points for in ways that would not detract perhaps from all of the information that our students need to engage in law school and across other places. General college communities, that just kind of picks up with the information that Commissioner Slatton-Hodges had already shared. It continues. And it continues right out into the professions in which our students are entering. So what are some of those negative externalities generated? Well, just a few here. I mean, I think many of them are probably things we could intuit, but exam performance for students or clinical and rotation performance. So it's affecting them in those ways, that stress, that anxiety, that depression, that suicidal ideation, that feeling of isolation, that insomnia, that need to engage perhaps with some substances such as Adderall or Vyvanse or other things to try to keep up and keep going and get all the work that is there to be accomplished. Professional, obviously, that's going to affect and spill over into the delivery of effective services. And so that means that this is not a law school problem. It's not a medical school problem. It's not a college problem. It's not a professional problem. It's a community problem. It affects all of us, and it affects the communities in which we live and work. I spoke just this morning with a good friend whose husband is the president at Bates College in Lewiston, Maine. So my friend is a law professor. His husband is the president of that college. Just yesterday, 2,000 students fed and base touches with those 2,000 students at Bates College because of the shooting that took place, at the tragedy earlier this week. And so I don't know why I digressed in that way, but I guess because I'm saying this is a world problem. It might begin in one place, but it extends and it has these reverberative effects that we must take seriously, in my opinion, if we are going to do right by our students, and in so doing, do right by our professions and do right by the world in which we live and work. Professional exit. People exiting, the different arenas, saying, I just don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I don't want to be a nurse anymore. I can't deal with what I'm confronting. Burnout, overcommitment. We could go on. General stress, anxiety, alcohol, drug dependence, use disorder, financial burdens. It has an economic effect also, and certainly not everything need be discussed or addressed in terms of, quote, law and economics or economics in general. But sometimes people need to see some of those statistics, because even if you're not thinking about it from this perspective, maybe we can capture some interest if we think about how it is affecting economies and productivity and lost revenue, and how it is affecting housing insecurity. And then we have this recursive, in my opinion, effect where we might have someone experiencing food insecurity or housing insecurity, and then we're just exacerbating some of the other problems, whether it's a mental health concern or whether it's a mental health concern that spills over into crimes, quite frankly, when people, for the reasons that the myriad reasons people commit crimes. Quick data point on suicide rates from the CDC. I returned to their peak in 2021. I'd be interested to see what the next chapter on that reveals. So I would be interested to see. I have another friend who is a dean of a law school in the Midwest, and last year that friend informed me that two people at that school, two students, had taken those students' own lives, in part because of some of the, we don't have all of the information, right? But that has had an effect on every single student at that law school and every member of the community, and it should. What are some of the causes? Medical students and law students, and I should broaden that. Medical students, we could say anyone within the medical arena here, but you've got different types of academic stresses. Of course, you have the step 1 exams. I'm not really familiar with that, but apparently that's a high stakes exam that happens after the second year of medical school, at least. I'm not certain, but a lot of information in medical school, a lot of information, a lot of data. A lot of things one must know. For law students, the same thing. I think that maybe one of the differences for law students is that students are often experiencing a different educational format. There's the Socratic method that everyone talks about, the higher stakes, the vulnerability of having to talk about things in a law school classroom that might seem less factual and sometimes might seem very personal or very I don't know how to put this. You're being asked to discuss some of the big issues and problems and of the day in ways that might make that individual feel really uncomfortable and exposed. Work-life balance, relational conflict, volume of information, finances, their stresses and causes. One of the causes for these stressors is the money that is being expended on the education, depending upon what's going on, need to be successful, lack of time, questions about the future, imposter syndrome, pressure to perform well, to get good placements. Again, it seems like you have this domino, then it goes to the next, then it goes to the next. So much life or death situations when you're dealing with people who sometimes are experiencing the most tragic or threatening, life-threatening, identity-threatening, life, liberty, property in these arenas. Moments in that person's life. There's so much that we could talk about, and there's a timing overlay as well. First-year students, they tend to have these stresses, whether it's in the medical educational field or law field, of being away from home, maybe higher workload, the cost, support, different type of structure perhaps than they're used to. Second year students, the studies are reflecting that that after the first year, the stressors are more about comparing and competing. And what are my opportunities going to be? And am I going to compare well with my classmates? And am I going to secure the types of internships or externships or fellowships or placements that are going to assist? By the third year, some of the concerns, third and fourth year, really is shifting more towards what's my employment going to look like within this arena? And then what is my real exposure to the human suffering that is affecting our students even before they enter the professions proper and before they figure out exactly what they will be doing thereafter. Now, it seems trite, and perhaps it is, to talk about doing what you can, because you can only do so much. But again, I reiterate that which I've already heard this morning about Venn diagrams and overlaps and just that attempt to join forces. What can institutions do? What can individual students do? And then what can individual faculty and staff members do? There's more than that, of course. And I do think that there's a feedback loop, where the more you can work in one arena, you're going to have an effect in the second, and then vice versa back to the first. So there's a lot that can be done if we think about needing to do it, not just talking about it, as has earlier been noted, but doing what we can. This is going to demand creativity. No entity can do it alone. We can't simply grow our clinics, for example. We can't simply grow Goddard down in Norman, because we've got different types of constraints, and because there might be more effective and efficient and optimal ways to attack some of these problems. There's going to have to be, and we have an ethical obligation. I believe that firmly, not just a personal obligation, but an ethical obligation to do what we can. When I became interim dean in 2019, and then I became permanent dean a few years thereafter, I admit I took a kitchen sink approach to some of this, notwithstanding everything that I tried to learn about it. I just attacked it from a bunch of different ways. Wellness rooms, library, whole resources. We purchased a whole suite of books on imposter syndrome and stress and the introverted lawyer, and DISC assessments and INFP under the Myers-Briggs, and how might you interact with your colleagues, your faculty, each other, yourselves when you're here. We had yoga sessions, we did jigsaw puzzles, we had special events, we had mindfulness meditation once a week online. Anyone could join. Very few people did. Walking group, I missed one this morning. We started that every Friday morning. We'll walk for at least an hour. Anyone who wants shows up. We walk together for an hour. The students talk about whatever they want. Sometimes they're upset. Sometimes they want to talk about something that's happened in their classroom. Sometimes they just want to talk about what the weekend will bring. But then they hear each other, and they know that they're not alone. And then I hear what they're saying, and I try to think about ways that the law school collectively can take some steps. Wellness week lectures, phone calls. There have been a few times where we've called every single student in the school, every single student. It hasn't always been easy, but we've called every student individually to say, we're checking in during probably in the height of COVID. We've got to wrap things up. I'm seeing I'm losing a little bit of time here, and I apologize for that. Lawyers helping lawyers, we worked with them. Students helping lawyers, we worked with them. We have had anxiety small groups. We have had mental health professionals come in. Now, I think that I think that my kitchen sink approach and that of my cohorts who have done amazing work at the College of Law needs to be a little bit more structured. I'm really happy to say that just yesterday, we've got a few more interviews that we're engaging this week, but we will have interviewed 32 applicants for an embedded at the College of Law mental health and wellness coordinator, program specialist, not to perform direct services, but instead to triage and do the types of referrals and figure out the ways and the places, whether it's intervention, prevention, postvention, at whatever decisional point. So we're going to have someone in the College of Law, and it's taken a long time, but I'm absolutely thrilled that we have gotten there. Worked very carefully with former Commissioner Terry White. She was able to provide some information about some of the things that work very well from a data-driven and evidential approach for how we might confront some of these things and tackle them importantly. This is full circle. This is a circle there, so I was drawn to it. I just got this card last week. I am Pollyanna, I admit, middle name, Kathleen Pollyanna. Guzman, but I can't, I don't think I can overstate the effect of kindness. I just don't. I just don't. And I know that's childish and I know that might seem babyish, but I do think it changes so much. This is a picture of Cornel West. I think he's a brilliant, fascinating man, one who strikes me as very full of love. I had to put a picture of me with all my gray, since you saw me with my little scaredy cat purse there picking up trash. But I met him about 6 weeks ago at OU, and I was so struck by so much of that which that man had to say, as well as the gentleman with whom he is pictured here, Robert George, who's a philosopher and a lawyer who teaches at Princeton. But Cornel West said, never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. And so when I talk about relationships mattering and changing everything, I think that's just love. A love of a certain type, a love of who we are, what we do, love of each other, and an appreciation for all of the opportunities that we have. I'm grateful that you all let me share my story. I'm embarrassed still, but I think I'm going to get over it. I might just have to have a second shot of coffee after this presentation. Thank you very much.